And hello, everybody. Welcome to Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel. I'm Marshall, your host, and I am starting the Discord live stream as well. So here we are. And today we're going to talk about why you should never play right out. But there we are, back again. Let me just hook this up, and now we won't have that problem any further. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel, the official podcast of the International Kriegsspiel Society. My name is Marshall. I'm your host, and I am here to talk to you about why you should never play Kriegsspiel. I've got a list of reasons put together as to why you should not play Kriegsspiel, but I just want to let everybody know if you want the full experience of today's show, I suggest you check us out on YouTube. Although you'll hear me on audio here on Discord, I am streaming an image to YouTube. And the reason I don't want to do both or stream here is simply because the last couple times I've tried doing that, Discord is really it's not built for this sort of thing. It's only built for its own environment. And since we stream to YouTube, I think you get the better experience there because Discord and OBS and YouTube don't all play very well together. So I'm accustomed to streaming to YouTube. So that's what we're going to do today. In any case, I do have YouTube open, and of course I have Discord open, and you can at any time here on the Discord raise your hand, and I will invite you to speak if you have a question or a comment or something you want to say. Likewise, if you say anything in the YouTube, I will catch it there, and I will interact with you there just the same. All right, let's talk about why you should never play Kriegsspiel. And what you see if you're watching the YouTube is you see I have this really cool game open, and this is a game I'd love to play. This is a legendary game. It's called The Campaign for North Africa, and it is the most legendary war game in history, specifically because it takes a really long time to play. I don't know how many hours it takes to play it. I can't imagine setting this up in the den or the basement or the man cave, and or the she shed for that matter, right? Wow, I mean, look at all of these counters that you have and all of these other pieces that you have to go through. It is literally a legendary game. In fact, it's even been featured on television. What was that show? Big Bang Theory, I think. They kind of made a reference to it where the main character, and I forget his name off the top of my head, was like, hey, I want to play this game. Because, it is legendary for its complexity. But here's a very beautiful game module, and I recommend you play this instead. Look, they even have fantastic libertarian literature, so if you are prepared for the apocalypse, if you're a prepper or a libertarian, here you go. All right, there you are. So there is, you've got reading material. If not, you might want to switch those out with something else. But anyway, this here would be a really cool game to play as opposed to Kriegsspiel. And why? Why am I suggesting such a silly thing? Well, let's get into it. The big reason why is, of course, that Kriegsspiel will ruin every other war game, because when you get into these other war games, you end up in situations where you are no longer satisfied with this sort of thing. Now, when I say that, I'm going to offer that with a caveat, because even though Kriegsspiel has ruined hex encounter wargaming for me, I would still play a hex encounter wargame. In fact, I am still playing one or two hex encounter wargames, but the fact is, no, I prefer to play Kriegsspiel to any other hex encounter wargame, and because most all of the games out there are hex encounter, it's a big loss. It's like losing a family member or something. Like, oh man, really? What do you do? But here's the deal, okay? The first reason why you should never play Kriegsspiel is because right now you're looking at this map and you're thinking how beautiful it is. It looks really nice. But the fact is, after you play Kriegsspiel, you look at this and you're like, what is this stuff? There is no natural terrain feature on the planet that works like this. See how the terrain here, the ridge or whatever, follows the hexes? And you have a little plateau here, or it's a valley. Maybe it's a valley, I don't know. But you can't really tell unless you have some familiarity with it. It looks like this here is the low ground, so this must be a valley here with some low spots. But it ruins these games because you look at this terrain and you think, well, this is absolutely silly. This is not what real life terrain looks like. And of course, you're absolutely correct. Real life terrain does not at all look like this. It's not laid out in hexes. It does not follow straight lines or anything like this. Hexes, of course, are a convention that are created to create a sense of order and fairness, and you can use hexes in Kriegsspiel. I've used them myself. I've used a hex overlay, and in fact, we typically use a grid overlay on our Kriegsspiel maps, which I can show you here directly. If I pull up anything, let's see here, let's just pull up one of our Kriegsspiel games, and you'll see that there is a grid overlay on the map. But the grid does not restrict movement. So you see how we have a grid here on my favorite map of all time. The grid simply gives us a way to eyeball movement, because in Kriegsspiel, you're not out there with the ruler measuring things, you're simply moving the pieces. And this grid, which specifically here is 400 paces, tells us how far a unit can move in column and so on in a 5-minute interval or what have you. And so the grid helps to adjudicate movement, but it does not restrict movement, as opposed to a hex, which does exactly that. It does restrict the movement. And so that's one of the reasons why you shouldn't play Kriegsspiel, because once you have this kind of realistic terrain and the terrain actually has an effect on the pieces, unlike in a hex and counter war game where the terrain effect is applied to all of the units in the stack. Whereas in Kriegsspiel, you could have a unit that is half on higher ground and half on lower ground, and only that half which is on the higher ground gets the effect of it. Here, the whole stack gets it, and of course, you're dealing with much larger spaces. Obviously, one of these hexes is at least several, probably a mile or several kilometers in size. But at the end of the day, it's unrealistic, it's artificial, and it feels that way. Whereas in Kriegsspiel, it feels realistic. So yeah, this ruins that for you if you play Kriegsspiel. All right, let's talk about some other stuff here. Let's see here. One of the big things that I get into is a lack of fog of war. In Kriegsspiel, because it's played umpired and double blind, you don't see the enemy until you can see him, until you are literally in contact with the enemy. Now, if you're playing around a table, if you have the 3-table experience going on in-person Kriegsspiel, if one member of your side is in contact with the enemy, then all of you will see the unit because the block will be placed on the map. On the other hand, if you're playing one of these games, and I've got a bunch of units here, and the bad guys have a bunch of units, over here, let's say, and I'm just going to put pieces out for the heck of it. The thing is these guys in a Kriegsspiel would never see these guys, and vice versa. On the other hand, when you play this particular game, the minute I put down a stack of units, you are aware of it. And when I move my stack of units, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes, you see that stack moves. And that's a problem because that eliminates fog of war. If you see that, hey, I am moving my units this way straight across the desert, you know that the attack is going to come right here. And as a result, you can begin to prepare for it. You can begin to move your reinforcements up and try to block it and whatever you're going to do to prepare for it, which in Kriegsspiel, you would not have that opportunity. So that's another reason why you shouldn't play Kriegsspiel, because if you play Kriegsspiel, you have this really cool fog of war experience that messes with your mind. It creates anxiety. It makes you wonder what's going on, and you might be moving left while the enemy's moving right, in which case you're in a lot of trouble, and then you have another problem that you have to solve. Whereas in a hex and counter game, you don't have those issues. If my opponent moves right, well, I'm going to see that, and I'm going to move to my left in this case to counter him, or his right, if you will, and we're going to end up fighting. And I guess that's cool and all, but it's not very realistic necessarily. You could argue that, well, we have reconnaissance, whether it's satellite imagery or in World War II here, we've got reconnaissance overflights going on, and it's kind of hard to move a convoy of ships, which is what it would take to move just one of these counters across the Mediterranean. And so there is some degree of knowledge that would be possessed by both sides. But it's still perfect knowledge. You can still see, hey, this is a stack and this stack has, so many counters in it. You still have more knowledge than you might have realistically, because it is theoretically possible in the real world to move an entire formation without being observed. Maybe the weather is a consideration. Maybe you're moving at night. I don't know. Maybe the distance isn't that great, so a night move you can make undetected. All of those things come into play. But again, in Hex Encounter Wargaming, you don't get the fog of war. Now, there are some tricks that you can come up with in Hex Encounter Wargaming to create some fog of war. One is to have decoy pieces, stacks that don't actually have anything in them. They're just there and they can move, but it keeps the enemy guessing. Another one might be is you don't allow your opponent to examine the stack, which I like, because then they can't look at your counters and count up how many combat factors you have, what your attack or defense factors are, and they have to guess, is your defense 1 or is your defense 20? And they don't know. And so that's okay, but again, it's a contrived manner of creating some kind of fog of war. You still know that something is probably going on there, or if you're a clever player, you can tell, well, that's probably a decoy stack and this is probably the main attack. And, what do you do then, right? So again, fog of war is very addictive because it allows you to get one up on the enemy. So you like having it in your advantage, but it's also very scary because you don't know if the enemy's doing that to you. It creates a sort of anxiety and a decision calculus that you don't get in Hex Encounter Wargaming. And that's why when you play Kriegsspiel, it ruins cool games like this. So you don't want to play Kriegsspiel. All right, let's talk about some other things. Another one of the problems is that a lot of your conventional war games are balanced. Now, they've gotten away from this more recently in that a lot of games are not really balanced per se, because if they're based on history isn't balanced, is it? When you play an old school conventional war game, let's say the most childish example is Battleship, right? Let's say you're playing the game Battleship, right? Well, you and your opponent have exactly the same ships, exactly the same grid layout, exactly the same everything. So both sides have a pretty fair chance of winning. It's just like chess or checkers or any other type game, or tic-tac-toe. There might be a slight advantage to going first, but then of course you alternate who goes first and so on. And the end result is the game is relatively balanced. And we do that because we believe in fairness, right? When you play a game, it needs to be fair. Kriegsspiel, no. In Kriegsspiel, it can be an entirely imbalanced scenario. Now, in some historical games, it might be like, well, you're going to lose. In this case, Campaign for North Africa, there's no scenario probably where the Germans are actually going to win conventionally, meaning that they're going to push all the way to Cairo and they're going to take over all of North Africa and the British are going to be completely routed. Is that possible within the game and the game rules? Sure. If the German player knows really how to play and the Allied player is brand new and doesn't know what they're doing, or they make some serious blunders, okay, maybe. But in most war games where the opponents are somewhat evenly matched, history tends to repeat itself. And in a case of like, well, if the Germans survive to turn 20, if the Germans hold this line at turn 20, they technically win. Even though historically they're losing, they technically win the game because they held out longer. There's always some sort of a contrivance that's created to create some kind of balance. So if the units aren't the same on both sides, there will be one side has this advantage, one side has more powerful units, and the other side has a greater number of units. There's always some kind of balance created. Kriegsspiel does not believe in that. In Kriegsspiel, you can have an entirely imbalanced scenario where one side not only has superior units, they have more of them. And they maybe even have a terrain advantage. And maybe they're even playing on defense and your job is to attack. Oh man, what do you do then, right? And there might not be a clear way to win or lose. You might say at turn 20, we're going to call the game, and that's the end of the game. Okay, well, who won? I don't know. Because that's not what Kriegsspiel is about. Kriegsspiel isn't so much about who won. It's about simulating actual war. And in actual war, you can win or lose a battle and come away feeling kind of the same, which is not very good, you know? And you'll encounter that in real life too, of course. You'll end up in a situation where whether you win or lose that scenario in your real life, at the end of the day, when you lay your head down on your pillow, it doesn't feel like you won. It doesn't feel very good. It's bittersweet. It's sad. And real life is just like that. In fact, Wellington, the winner of the Battle of Waterloo, the British commander, would often become very depressed even after a victory simply because he kept thinking of the human cost involved. And that's realistic. That's real life. You know, some people like Napoleon might be absolutely giddy after winning a battle, but not Wellington. And it's here, on the other hand, there is a very clear system for victory. You're going to count up victory points. You're going to count up wins and losses. You're going to count up objectives. You're going to say, well, we took this city here. We took Tobruk. We took El Amin. We took whatever. And if we took those cities, then we are the undisputed winners of the game. And that's really cool. That's cool. But at the end of the day, that's just not realistic, okay? So Kriegsspiel will ruin that for you because you'll get that unrealistic stuff. One of the other things, and I really, really hate this one, it's called I go, you go. And that's called turns. We call that turns. Now in Kriegsspiel, we also have turns, but in Kriegsspiel, both players move simultaneously. And the umpire resolves the movement. They kind of average everything out, is my term for how they do it. And then they figure, well, the two units meet here, and there's an exchange, and here's the winner, here's the loser, here's the result, I should say. Whereas in a game like this, you go like, oh, well, it's my turn, so I'm going to move doot, 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 doot. Here I move over here. And now it's your turn, and now you saw where I moved, so you might say, well, I'm going to move like this, doot, doot, doot here, and I'm going to move this one here, here. Aha, look, now you're cut off. Ha, 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 I am so clever. Really? That's not how it is in real life. It is not like that in real life. I might say, you know, I think that's what you're going to do, so I'm going to try to block you and cut you off out of supply so that your whole super stack of 8 units is destroyed. So I might, in Kriegsspiel, I would have to give this order in advance. The umpire would move the pieces, and oh, look, I did this. Ha ha, I got you, right? You messed up. And that's how it happens in real life. You get these moments where one guy moves the wrong way, and then you move right on through or whatever, and now you have the makings of a glorious victory. Or in reverse, you know, maybe you do move here, but maybe then they move here and they completely cut you off or whatever. You know, things can happen in Kriegsspiel. That cannot happen in an I go, you go system because you get to see what your opponent does, and then you can react to it when it is your turn. And so that really is unrealistic. It ruins the realism of a battle because that's not what happens, right? Even though there tends to be a natural ebb and flow to a battle where one side kind of has the initiative, we might say one side is typically attacking and the other one is responding. We call this the OODA loop, right? It's a decision loop, and that is actually a thing. But this is not, this is a rough approximation of an OODA loop, right? You can get that effect, right? If I'm playing against somebody who is really good, they can move right and then forcing me to react by moving left, and they can move left and force me to react, and we can say they have some initiative. We can say they're inside my OODA loop. They have some kind of an advantage because they're dictating how I'm going to attack or defend or whatever. That's cool, but it is still artificial. And then for me to switch that, to flip that back to my advantage, in an I go, you go system, it's very hard to do. Whereas in Kriegsspiel, that can happen instantly, right? I might actually allow myself to kind of appear to be inside the other guy's decision loop, so he thinks he's doing great, and I bait him forward. And then all of a sudden, I have another force appear on the flank or in the rear, and now guess who is in advantage? It's me. I'm inside your OODA loop now, and you're having to react to me. But in a hex and counter game, I think that's harder to do when you go and I go, and vice versa, that's a problem. There are some contrivances now in Hex encounters, such as a chit pull system, so you don't know who goes first. There might be an initiative system or a point system where the one who lost the most goes second or has to go first if there's an advantage to going second, however the game mechanics are. But again, these are all contrivances. They are artificial. Real life does not work that way. And that's why Kriegsspiel ruins wargaming like this for you. All right, let's talk about some other things. Just going to check the YouTube real quick. Yes, Cone is correct. Kriegsspiel is just too good. All right, gaming tactics. If you're playing a game and the game has a rule book like it has here, and it has combat results tables, as it's going to have, here's your table right here, okay? Oh, no, these are characteristics, but let's see if there's a, there's always a, here we go. These here are your adjustments and stuff. So anytime you have any kind of a chart like this, where you have an adjustment for the larger side or the smaller side or whatever, while there is some basic, there's actually room for this in reality, right? Obviously, there's an advantage to having overwhelming force against your opponent. At the end of the day, if you know what's on this table because you look at the table or because you've memorized the table, what you will do is you will sit there and you will move pieces in such a manner that you can actually then take advantage of these differences. Now, in real life, you would not do that because in real life, you don't know that if I, pile on 3 to 1 here, I don't know that the enemy's not going to take advantage elsewhere because there's fog of war. I don't know what he's got somewhere else all the time. I don't have perfect intel like I get on a Hex encounter game. So we do this thing, and then a player who knows the rules, if they know the mechanics of the game, if they develop something that we would call an exploit of the rules, suddenly now you're just losing, and you have no chance of turning the tide because your opponent has memorized this chart or they're referring to it constantly, and they know if they can get that third piece, if they can get that 3 to 1 on you, they get that, +2 advantage to the roll, and they're going to consistently kick your butt all the way back to Alexandria, right? And you don't want that because that's not realistic. Real life does not work that way. Can you imagine, General Patton saying that, or well, heck, even General Rommel in this case saying, well, if we just send another company of tanks in, we're going to have an overwhelming advantage. No, they don't know this. But, that's just kind of how it goes. And that's why, again, Kriegsspiel ruins this experience for you because, well, that's different. Gaming tactics, you can't use them to win. The cool thing about this is in Kriegsspiel, new players can beat veteran players. There is no advantage to having great experience at Kriegsspiel versus a newcomer. If the newcomer has some luck, if they have some knowledge of the tactics, if they know what they're doing, if they have the better plan or whatever it may be, if things are in their favor, they're more likely to win. And that's the cool thing about Kriegsspiel. This is why you can have a legendary general lose to an upstart newcomer who isn't necessarily the greatest general, but they come in there because, hey, real life is just like that sometimes. Sometimes luck is a factor. Look at the Red Baron. The Red Baron was shot down by a relative nobody. And why? Well, because war is like that. Sometimes you can be the greatest, most experienced whatever, and a newcomer comes along and gets lucky or just has a trick or whatever that nobody ever thought of before, and bam, guess what? The old veteran is out. And that happens. And that can happen in Kriegsspiel. It does not happen, however, in a Hex encounter war game. I guarantee you that if I play this game against a person who has played it 10 times, regardless of what side I play, I'm going to lose. I'm going to lose. If I'm playing as the Allies, the British will be in Cairo by the end of the game because I have simply not played it before. And I don't have mastery of the mechanics or the combat results table, even though I can look at it. In my mind, all those connections that need to be made to play optimally, they take time for the brain to wire together and make those connections. And aha, I get it now. takes training, in other words. This isn't like you're born with this innate knowledge, like a horse that knows how to run as soon as it's born. It's like this. And so Kriegsspiel, on the other hand, you have that, which is really kind of cool. All right, double blind. We've talked about how when I go, you go, and you don't have the fog of war, that's a problem. But Kriegsspiel is played double blind. And the cool thing about that is it allows for the umpire to use their expertise and discretion to make decisions. For example, one side in a Kriegsspiel might observe the other side, but the other side does not observe them. What would be a case and example of that? Well, let's say, for example, I have just a couple of scouts and they're in some kind of concealment on top of a hill, and you have a huge formation. In a game like this, okay, I have my huge formation here, and then you've got your scouts here. Well, your scouts see me, but I also see your scouts because I know that you've got, an advanced guard or whatever up here because there's a marker on the board. And so obviously, we see each other in a game like this, whereas in Kriegsspiel, this piece would not be here, and I would continue to move and do whatever I'm doing in complete ignorance that the whole time I am under observation by the enemy, and the enemy is sending reports back to the commander. And so that's a really cool mechanic. And of course, when the commander gets the reports, they have to decide, well, what am I going to do with this information? First of all, this is where the enemy really is, but I don't know that. My last report, they were here because there's this time lag in the reporting. So they make the observation, they send the report back to headquarters, which is here. Maybe that's 15, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever. And by that time, they're here. But as the commander, I have to think and plan this out. I have to figure, well, by now they're probably here, so we'll plan our defense here or our attack here or whatever so that we catch them when they're on the move. Now, in real life, that's how it works, but in Hex Encounter, it does not work that way. I know where you are at all times, you know where I am at all times, and it does not matter how big a unit or how small a unit I deploy, you see it. And, that's not double blind, whereas in a double blind game, I don't know what you're doing until the umpire tells me that you're doing it or that I have some kind of contact. In fact, I don't know what you're doing. The umpire's going to tell me what you're doing. They're just going to tell me, hey, you see the enemy. It's up to me now to figure out what to do with that, and that's a lot more realistic. Simultaneous. When it's simultaneous, both sides move at the same time. Again, we talked about I go, you go, how I don't like that, but when it's simultaneous, both sides can end up in a situation they don't plan for. Let's say I decide, I think that you're going to move this way, and so I'm going to order my unit to move this way. Maybe you think this unit's going to move this way or some other way, but in reality, because it's simultaneous, we end up like this. Suddenly, we have a confrontation, we have a fight that neither one of us is planning to get into. And now we have to untangle that, we have to roll with that result, we have to make that work to our advantage, which is not something you get in Hex Encounter Wargaming because the I go, you go, okay? When it's simultaneous, however, you have these really cool situations that you're like, oh wow, I wasn't planning on that. Now I have to change the mission or I have to change the plan or something, and I have to get that handled because suddenly we took a loss that we were not expecting to take, or we enjoyed a win that we weren't expecting to get. Simultaneous movement is really cool. Another thing is what I call the fudge factor. Kriegsspiel is the land of fudge, and the cool thing about that is, let's say we end up in a situation where all these units pile onto this unit here in red. And of course, as per this particular chart, and other things, the outcome is quite predictable. Obviously, red's going to be eliminated. But let's say I am playing this Hex Encounter game, and as I play this Hex Encounter game, red gets a lucky roll. They roll a 6, or they roll a 12, or whatever it may be. Meanwhile, white rolls a 1 or a 2, whatever, right? Well, all of a sudden now I'm in a situation where we have a heroic last stand scenario here. Now, these things did happen occasionally in history, right? There are places where, we told the commander to surrender and he replied nuts and he never surrendered. Okay, that happens, but that's really an outlier. What do you do in that case? Well, in a case like Kriegsspiel, the umpire can adjudicate that. They can say, no, that's just ridiculous. These guys are out of ammo. They're out. They're just out because that's what it would be. Maybe white has done the work or whatever, or I don't want this to throw the scenario off, or maybe it's just completely unrealistic, which to me would be the acceptable reason to do this. It's completely unrealistic. They're out. Whereas in a hex and counter game where the rules are interpreted literally, like, well, the rule says this, then this, then this, and this is the result. So the result is now you're stuck here for another turn or two to try to eliminate this unit because the rule says, even though in reality it only represents like 3 dudes, but they exert a zone of control in all direction and you can't get supply, so you have to eliminate it. And well, if you keep rolling poorly and they keep rolling well, I'm sorry. Okay, but really? No. In Kriegsspiel, the umpire could just say that's no longer a factor. Maybe those 3 guys aren't destroyed, but they're not going to exert a zone of control that cuts enemy supply. Now, in the rules, it says so, but in Kriegsspiel, you don't have these same rules. And in Kriegsspiel, you get the fudge factor, and the umpire can say, that's just silly. And then the game proceeds. So it's a lot more realistic. So again, this is another way that Kriegsspiel ruins cool games like these. All right. A lot of times players will say, well, let's make some house rules. That's obviously silly. Let's make a house rule. But then when players make house rules, they tend to break games. In Kriegsspiel, before I get to the Kriegsspiel part, let's just say that it's because people don't know how to make house rules. They think that, I'm going to do this because it's just silly otherwise, or they're correcting what they feel is a flaw or a problem in the game. Now, I am a big fan of house rules. I think house rules are fantastic. I think players should do them because designers have a certain way of doing things in their mind. And by the time they've written the rules for the games and they play tested the games and they've pushed it out to play testers, you're going to get to this point where they're burned out. And the play testers are never going to know the rules as well as the designer. And so you end up putting out a product that's inherently flawed, and that's why you have this here, which is called Board Game Geek, and this tablet here. And let's see, I don't know if I can, it's probably locked. Let me unlock this. But if you were to scroll through the Board Game Geek for this game, you would probably find that, of course, this isn't here, it's the order of battle, but you would probably find that I'm not going to mess with it anymore, but you would probably find that there are answers. There's errata, as we call it in war games. And the need for the errata is simply because the designer could not think of every possible scenario and permutation. And you can make a house rule to try to plug that gap, especially if there is no errata that answers your question. But at the end of the day, when you do that, you might find yourself breaking some other fundamental mechanic of the game and thereby breaking the game. In Kriegsspiel, oh my goodness, bless me, right about to sneeze there. In Kriegsspiel, you modify the rules, but you don't ever house rule them so much. What you might do is say, we're going to do a +1 or a ±1 die roll modifier. In fact, in my rule sets, I tell people that a +2 die roll modifier in either way is really pushing it, and you never probably ever want a +3 die roll modifier. If you're going to house rule my rules, which I encourage and tell you to do, you should probably never go with a +3 modifier. If you're having to do that, maybe you should just use the fudge factor and say that's out. And don't even bother with the roll. But at the end of the day, you can get people who break games because they create house rules that break other things because the game is just so dependent on these written rules and the player's understanding and so on. That's just a bit much. Whereas in Kriegsspiel, again, the judge just sort of handles it. And the judge knows, the +1 modifier is enough either way, and sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, and that's that. The other thing, and the last thing that I have for you here, is that one of the problems with games like this is they can get very, very competitive. And friendships can be ruined by playing these games, And in Kriegsspiel, it's not like that. In Kriegsspiel, it's more of a gentle personally game. We tell people in the IKS that it's meant to be gentle personally. We often don't tell the players who won or lost. What we'll do is we'll select one or two players that we feel did the best, regardless of what side they're on. And we'll say, this person, if I had to pick a winner, would be the winner of the scenario. And the reason for that is simply because they did the best they could with what they had. And that's it. There might not be a clear winner or loser of a particular battle, and the players may argue and debate afterwards who would have won or who should have won or what they think. But history is exactly like that. You can have a battle where both sides claim, hey, we won. We won the war. We won the battle, whatever it may be, regardless of what the historians say 50 or 100 years later, you know. And that happens in real life. Whereas in these games, it's very clear who wins and who loses. And then, of course, you have people who are like, well, the loser buys the drinks or whatever, and they get into big arguments over that, you know. Whereas in Kriegsspiel, it's like at the end of the day, if there's a rule discrepancy, I will sit down with whoever I'm playing with if the umpire can't make the decision or if there is no umpire. We're playing Kriegsspiel style, so we're writing down our orders. We'll interpret the orders together. That's two-player Kriegsspiel, so there's no umpire. But we interpret them together as friends. And we sort of just kind of work everything out ourselves. And it's not about, oh, hey, look, I got one over on you. No, it's about we're just trying to have some fun here and, work on the scenario and see where we come up with. And whoever wins or loses, maybe there is no winner or loser. But in these kinds of games, there is clearly a victory condition for both sides, and there's winners and there's losers. And again, that can be too competitive. It can mess things up and even spoil friendships sometimes, or at least ruin gaming friendships, or people like, I don't want to game with you anymore. I'll be your friend, but we're not going to game anymore. Kriegsspiel generally doesn't get into that because it's designed to be gentle personally. And again, newcomers can be old timers and vice versa, and that's why Kriegsspiel tends to ruin these kinds of experiences for you. It's just all around a better, more wholesome experience in gaming versus these hex encounter style games. So there you have it. All right, let's take a look here on the YouTube. I don't see any questions on the YouTube, but if any of you want to come up and speak, now's the time to raise your hand. Maybe you have a question, maybe you have a comment. Maybe you think I missed something. Maybe you think I'm wrong. I see all the hands going up now. But whatever it may be, now's your chance. Speak now or forever hold your peace, because if you don't, we're going to wrap this up. I want to say hello to Achilles, to Jan, to G-Puzzle. Mike Sheeter's here. Chris is here. Good to see you guys. And of course on Cone, Achilles, and Let's Play History, also Jan. Good to see you guys on the YouTube. All right, well, I want to thank you guys all for being here. I guess I must have done an amazing job with the podcast because nobody wants to contradict me. That or you just don't want to put up with me, which is probably more likely. But that's why I don't think you should ever play Kriegsspiel, because if you do, you're going to ruin all of these cool hex and counter war games. And that'll be the end of it, right? You'll only ever want to play Kriegsspiel from then on. Now I exaggerate. You'll still play some hex and counter, but you will want to play it like Kriegsspiel, which you can do. There are ways you can do it. But yeah, it's pretty intense when you play Kriegsspiel compared to when you play this sort of stuff. This stuff looks mild. So Kriegsspiel's definitely the harder drug. So there you have it. All right, I want to thank all of you for being here today and for watching the show. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, feel free to put them into the YouTube channel after the fact, and we'll come back around and answer some of those questions. I want to thank you all, and we will see you on our next adventure.